Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. It helps out the channel so much. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I do post content just like this as often as I can, and I'm always doing my best to make sure that these videos are as high quality as I can get them to be. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads, nothing between the stories, nothing after the stories, just the one after this intro. I have to put at least one in there somewhere. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. You polished that one off right quick, Cheryl said, taking away the empty dish from my booth. You need a refill on that drink, hon? She asked. Nah, I'm good, Cheryl. Let's just get this over with. Sure thing. I'll be back out in just a minute, she said before heading to the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. I hate Applebee's. Between the vintage Americana plastered to every wall and the dim lighting, the place is just depressing. Pick a lane and stick to it, I say. If you want to pretend to be a fancy pub, take some of the crap off the walls, and maybe get some tables that aren't made from the yellow laminate wood they let kids scribble on in preschool. Oh, and maybe serve me some food that isn't slop from a microwave. I don't mind crappy junk food. In fact, I just might like it too much. But don't take a Pinto and parade it out in front of me calling it a Porsche. I may be dumb, but I'm not stupid, you know? I slammed my fist into said laminate table, earning me a glance from Dick and Balls over at the bar. They were here every day, but had never spoken a word to me. Hell, I don't even think I had ever heard them speak to each other. Quick as they had turned my way, they lost interest and went back to nursing their hose water. Dollaritas, once again, fading into background props for the drab locale. Yep, I hated Applebee's, yet here I was. It was better than the alternative. I heard the double doors swing open and saw Cheryl coming down the lane with a large bowl in her hand. As she approached, a faint buzzing began to grow in volume with every step. When she got to my table, she let the bowl in front of me and pulled away the large cloth that had been covering it. The final dish was always served with a showman's flourish. For what reason? I still do not know. Oh my, don't that look good? Cheryl said, looking with genuine adoration at the writhing bowl of black hornets that she had sat before me. They were packed in tight, dozens upon dozens of the foul creatures. They frantically crawled over one another, buzzing angrily as they skittered, but they didn't leave the confines of the bowl. I sat immobile, staring at the dish. My finger tapped nervously on the table. You know, you could have some if you want, I said to Cheryl, who still loomed beside the table. She always stood and watched me eat. Oh, that's mighty kind, but I could never. That's your dish. You're the customer here. It's just my job to take care of you. Figures. Cheryl loved all the food, but never wanted to eat it. Go on now, she said excitedly. It's gonna get cold. I'm working on it, just give me a minute to appreciate my food, okay, Cheryl? I whimpered at the lady, my voice cracking like only half a nut had dropped. Embarrassing, but who would blame me? She put her hands in front of those gestures of false surrender. The kind you give when you weren't sorry for what you said, but sorry someone misinterpreted it. My apologies. I just want you to enjoy it, that's all. Yeah, enjoy it. Okay, Cheryl. Time was wasted, and there was one thing I was certain of. It was that sitting there staring at that bowl wouldn't make it go away. So I took a deep breath and reached inside. My hands pulsed with the vibrations of the wings as I raised the ball of fearsome insects and plopped them into my mouth. I started to chew and the wasps began to sting. White-hot pain filled my throat. While I chewed, the wasps, not instantly ground up between my teeth, angrily drove their stingers into my tongue. Some took flight in the small cavern of my mouth and flew down the back of my throat, choking me and piercing the soft walls of my esophagus with their stingers, before sinking to acid death awaiting them in my stomach. My eyes watered. I reached into the bowl for another bite, some dropping out from the sides of my mouth when I couldn't fit the whole handful over my now swollen tongue. Cheryl dutifully scooped these escapees away like the discarded peanut shells I had spent my childhood happy throwing on the floor, all the while watching my agony unfold in solemn silence. An unsavory grunting was emanating from my throat now. It hurt to chew. Hell, it hurt to even flex the muscles of my throat, but my gag reflex was on autopilot, trying to free itself from the chitinous bits that clung to the back of my tongue like broken husks of popcorn. I tried to swallow my third mouthful of tiny demons and came up short. The wad of chewed bugs hung stuck in the back of my windpipe, refusing to go down. My throat was swelling shut. I retched. I coughed. I wheezed. I even wound up a fist and punched myself in the gut, trying anything to reclaim my open airway. But the multitude of stings were taking hold. With every second, I felt the breaths I took grow more shallow. One hand clawed at my throat, while the other frantically waved at Cheryl, but I knew that wasn't going to do any good. She just stood by, watching. Panic washed over me, followed by an intense wave of dizziness. I looked at her pleading one last time before smacking face first into my table and spilling the remaining wasps to the floor. Cheryl took her rag and wiped the bugs clean, then picked up the dish and headed back to the kitchen. I awoke with a start and found myself sitting in my booth, the menu already placed in front of me. Every time it always felt the same, like you just came to from one of those dreams where you were falling and your whole body jolts to life, still carrying that imagined momentum. Cheryl has already made her way to me. That woman is not a time waster. "What'll it be, hun?" she asks, pouring me a glass of water. "Just start me off at the top of the appetizers, Cheryl. We'll work our way down," I tell her, in the tired, monotone voice that has become my norm. "I'll go ahead and bring out the ultimate trio," she says before starting to the back again. "Let's go ahead and bring the nachos too," I call before she's out of earshot. "Any way we can just get all of them out in one big pile?" Cheryl gives it some thought for a moment, then shrugs. "Sure thing, baby. I don't see why not." Did you know that there are 4 nacho platters on the app menu? God forbid a guy with a penchant for corn and decision paralysis ever darkens the floor of the establishment. They say variety is the spice of life, but they're wrong. It's a pain in my butt. Now, of course, by this point, I'm sure you all realize that this ain't exactly your run-of-the-mill Applebee's. And for that matter, I'm not your run-of-the-mill patron. I'm dead. Remember all that junk food? Turns out they gave you a big hint right there in the name. That crap just ain't good for you. And I ate a lot of it. The new generation has a word for it. Stunt food, I think they call it. Burgers stacked so high you can't fit your jaw around them. Or maybe a plate of fries coated in so many layers of meat and cheese that you can't even see the spuds. That was my thing. If a restaurant had some type of gimmick entree, I wanted to try it. And try I did. Often. Too often. Overall, I stayed pretty active. I wasn't even that big of a guy. But all that fat and cholesterol slowly built up on my insides. It sat hidden away. A silent killer choking out my arteries until one day my heart just couldn't keep up. Funnily enough, I had been out at the local park, walking my dog when it happened. We got to the uphill portion and each footstep I took started to feel heavier than the last. I figured I was just really beat, but when my breath began getting shallow, I knew something wasn't right. Another couple of steps and it felt like someone had tied a rope around my chest and yanked it taut. I was on the ground in seconds. Tater ran around me in frantic dashes, barking, while I curled up beaten to submission by the waves of squeezing and stabbing pain shooting through my heart. I heard some footsteps rushing up to me before I faded away, but they were too late. I closed my eyes on the world and woke up here, at Applebee's. Threw a fit the first day I was in. Where am I? Where's Tater? What's going on? Got the attention of Dick and Bowles, who threw a pair of cursory glances my way from over at the bar. They paused the slow sipping on their cheap margaritas that always seemed to be full, even though there's not a bartender in sight, and stared holes into me. Wouldn't speak a word though when I hit them with my spattering of questions. The silence exasperated me further, and my voice got louder and louder till I was full-blown shouting in the empty restaurant. Eventually my hollering mustered Cheryl from the kitchen, but by that point, I was already heading for the door. She tried to call out to me, but I wasn't listening. I heard a faint, "I wouldn't do that," before I slammed into that wooden door like a linebacker with 2.0 GPA that knew a scout was in the crowd. The wave of heat that hit me in the face was a shotgun blast. Point blank, straight to the skull. Beads of sweat pooled and evaporated before they could even run down my brow. As I flailed out the door and stumbled over my own feet, I could feel my lips dry and crack on the trip to the ground. I hit a patch of sidewalk and my skin sizzled. The first in a vast collection of injuries sustained at this god-forsaken Applebee's. I leapt to my feet and my eyes grew so wide I expected them to bulge out of their socket. I was standing on a 4x4 block of sidewalk, but a couple good steps away from me, the ground just flat out ended. The Applebee's hung suspended over a gaping pit that burned with a fire, the likes of which I had never seen. It made the horizon glow with a deep, hateful shade of orange, and roared with such intensity that it sounded like I was trapped in a wind tunnel. Yet, over the roaring blaze, that was something more. It wasn't the roar of the flame I was hearing. It was screaming. As I looked on in fearful awe, I could see them. Thousands upon thousands of bodies rolling, writhing, burning, dripping flesh of magma sloughed off of them as they crawled upon one another, desperately pulling themselves forward, seeking any respite from the blaze. But with every forward motion of one, another slid further down, the process repeated ad infinitum. An ever-ascending ladder of the damned, reaching for an impossible destination. I was standing at the precipice of hell. "You might want to come back inside." A voice behind me broke me from my stupor, and I felt a hand on my shoulder. "If you fall, that's it. Done is done," Cheryl said, looking out over the pit with a sad gaze. I didn't need more convincing. I rejoined the waitress and took my spot at the booth that would indefinitely serve as my home. It was a bit more amiable to listen after witnessing the pit, and Cheryl gave me a vague, yet simple explanation of my predicament. I was dead as a doornail. A simple fact that was easy to accept after stepping out that doorway only to find myself at the brink of oblivion. Yep, I was dead all right, but that status of my eternal soul, that's where things got confusing. Believe it or not, I was a pretty good fella before I kicked off to the afterlife. Sure, I've got a bit of an attitude now, but you spend your endless days in a lonely Applebee's overhanging eternal hellfire, and tell me just how sunny your disposition is. I met just about all the requirements to march my way to the pearly gates. I was a good husband, volunteered at an animal rehab facility, and still called my mom every weekend. Even went to church on a fairly regular basis, and put my 10% in the plate every time. I would have been an easy case if it wasn't for that stunt food. Gluttony is a deadly sin, folks. And when you have to sign a waiver to eat a burger because it is so bad for you, well, that's gluttony. I had lived a good enough life to keep me from the hellfire, but I couldn't just waltz into the pearly gates. My consumption of all that greasy BS was close to, willfully taking my own life. I had chosen to abuse my food, and I had to repent for my lifestyle. So here I sat, not in a confessional booth, but one meant to feed a family of 4. Cheryl came out of the kitchen with one of those big platters in hand. She had opted to save time and just had them make my nacho arrangement on the serving tray instead of separate plates. "Here you go, hon. Careful now, that cheese is hot," she said, placing the mountain of corn chips in front of me. "Anything I can get ya?" "No, I'll be good for a while. Thanks, Cheryl," I replied, picking up a chip and starting in on the portion with the spinach dip. It only took a few bites before it hit me. By this point, I knew it was coming. Happened every time, sure as clockwork. But that didn't make it any more pleasant. The all too familiar wave of nausea that came from stuffing oneself a little too close to capacity rolled over me. I belched and felt the acid in my throat. A little bit of spinach dip sputtered out onto my chin. "Let me grab some extra napkins," Cheryl said. She returned a moment later with a small pile of paper towels and passed them to me, then returned to her spot, dutifully watching me suffer. It was always like this. Once I started eating, I immediately felt like I couldn't eat another bite, like there was no more room in my gut for more food. Yet I always did, and there always was. Acid reflux, nausea, protein farts. For the rest of the meal, I would be assailed by all of it, sitting right on the verge of vomiting. On the rare occasion I did, usually on purpose, just to buy myself a brief respite from the meal while Cheryl cleaned the table. I don't know the inner workings of divine justice, but from what I could tell, the gist of it was this. I had willfully put my body through the ringer with so much crappy food that now I had to experience the worst of what it would do to my body, day in and day out. According to Cheryl, the goal was to make it through the menu. If I could finish my meal, I could leave. The problem with that was the final item. This accursed Applebee's had a special item on the menu, one that I could only order after I finished everything else. It was always a secret, and it was always horrible. The first time Cheryl ever brought out my final meal, I thought repentance was going to be a piece of cake. 3 blobby fish stared up at me from the plate as Cheryl presented it to me with a big smile. "Ah, they're so fresh. It's like we just plucked them up out of the ocean," she grinned, looking hungrily at the trio. I wasn't the biggest fan of seafood, especially whole and raw, but I was sure I could manage. I started chowing down and thought it was going well, all things considered. Then halfway through fish number 2, my fork clattered to the table. I had slipped out of my grasp as my arm went numb. I tried to pick it back up, but found that I couldn't move. A couple more moments and I couldn't breathe. Turns out pufferfish are pretty poisonous. Tetrodotoxin, it's called. Even the name sounds heinous. Next thing I knew, I was back in the booth, heart racing with that falling sensation. Ready to start round 2. The next final meal wasn't so subtle. I did a double take when Cheryl plopped down a shimmering plate of broken glass. I was in utter agony as the micro shards embedded themselves into my gums and scraped at the sensitive roots of my teeth. By the time I had swallowed all of it, my throat was tearing open at the seams. Died a couple minutes later from blood loss. Getting into heaven wasn't going to be an easy task. I fought my hardest. I really did. But there's only so much a man can take before he starts to lose hope. I could make it through the regular menu like clockwork. Nausea be damned. But that final meal, the last hurdle to make it home free, was always too much. I had resigned myself to spending eternity in that booth, yet I kept eating. I had to. Nothing that happened to me in here could possibly be as bad as the pit awaiting outside. And if there was even a sliver of a chance that I made it through the final course, well, how far would you be willing to go for eternal bliss? Sometimes Cheryl would be down for a moment of conversation. It was always a nice break from the monotony. She was business-minded, though. I could only keep her gabbing for so long before it was back on the saddle and time to eat again. I polished off the last of the lava cake. What a sorry excuse for a dessert. I'm pretty sure we sold those frozen bricks of chocolate for our school fundraisers back in the day. Guess Applebee's is a fan of education. No child left behind here. All right, Cheryl. I guess it's about that time. Bring me my last supper. She gave me a bit of a frown, but not at all the same. I had a feeling she wasn't super big on the religious humor. I steeled myself, mentally preparing for whatever horrors awaited. Cheryl was quick on her feet. A few moments passed, and she was already bustling back through the door with a covered tray in hand. It was a big one today. My heart leapt in my chest when she pulled away the covering. It was a rattlesnake. I hated snakes. Had been terrified of them ever since I was a kid, and Tommy Martin, the school bully, had let a black snake loose behind me in the bathroom. I stood atop the toilet, bawling my eyes out, until the janitor heard and came to my rescue. That one had just been a baby, but the one sitting in front of me now was probably 7 feet long. I jumped in my seat when it rattled at me. I could see it following me with those glaring, slitted eyes, watching, waiting for me to reach out and touch it, to give it permission. Once I laid my hands on it, it would be free to mess up my day, and I could tell that it wanted nothing more. The rattle sounded again, shaking right to my bones. Cheryl clapped with glee. Well, isn't that fun? I love novelty desserts so much. Is today your birthday? I wanted to slap that woman, but I was frozen in my seat. Out of all the horrible things I had faced, this was just too much. My hand trembled as I managed to lift it to the table, the rattler's eyes following my every move. Its forked tongue flicked excitedly. Go on now, Cheryl said. I couldn't. It's gonna get cold. But I had to. I reached closer, my hand about to make contact. I swear I could see the snake's coils tense with anticipation, right before brushing along the rough scales. I stopped short. In the throes of desperation, my panic-ridden mind had produced a Hail Mary, an idea so simple that surely it wouldn't work. Cheryl, I can't do it, I said. That last bit of lava cake filled me up. The snake let out another fierce rattle and I continued. It looks so good, but I'm just too full. I've already eaten so much. I should have quit a long time ago. Cheryl gave me a long look. You know, my ma used to always say, the meal's only done when you're full. A soft smile graced the edges of her lips. I'll go get your check. After all this time, after so many meals, I had complained, moaned, vomited. Hell, I had died. But I had always kept on going. Never once had I taken a moment to just say, no thank you. Fueled by the desire to free myself, I was further trapped in a prison of my own making. I'm an idiot. I burst into a fit of laughter, a joyful, painful conglomerate of my pent-up agony, and my impending salvation flowed out of me in a fit of giggles. Earned myself the envied third look from Dick and Balls over at the bar. Cheryl came over with my receipt, and I hugged the woman. She returned the embrace as I cried into her shoulder. I really hate Applebee's, I said through sobs and sniffles. She patted my back while I bawled. I know, sweetie. Let's get you upstairs. I'm the senior deckhand on a 68-foot trawler called the Margaret Ann. I have worked this boat for 14 years. The crew is 6. Captain Hal, First Mate Donnie, Engineer Pete, and 3 deckhands. Me, Manny, and Ruben. 6. Hold on to that count while I tell you the rest of this. I do the head count before every dredge. That's my job as senior deckhand. Before we lower the trawl, before we haul it back, before we open the code end, I count. 6 men, accounted for, all in their right positions. It's a safety thing. The code end can swing when it comes up full, and if we're missing a man we don't know about, he could be in the water. I have done this head count on this boat for 14 years. The number has always been 6. I want you to remember that I am the one who knows. 3 days into the trip, we set the trawl over a section of bottom Hal had marked on the chart, 800 feet, the kind of depth where the haul takes nearly an hour and the cable hums under the load. We started bringing it up around 2 a.m. Hal called down asking what we had, and Danny said the sonar was reading a mass that wasn't fish, just a single dense object in the code end, big as a small car. Manny said it was probably a container, lost cargo from a freighter. We've pulled up tires, refrigerators, an entire fiberglass dinghy once. Whatever it was, we couldn't dump it back. The net was tangled around it and the cable was straining. We winched it onto the deck. The code end hit the planks with a sound I had heard before. 11 years ago I worked recovery on a ferry that capsized in fog. We pulled 14 people out of the water that week. They all sounded like that when we set them down on the deck. Not a thud, a wet weight. The way a body sounds when it has been in cold water long enough to take some of the cold with it. I had not heard that sound in 11 years. I was hearing it now. We did not open the net. Hal came down from the bridge. He looked at the code end for a long time. He told us to lash it down where it sat, leave it under the tarp, and not open it until daylight. He said he wanted Pete to look at it first. I did the head count. 6. Hal back on the bridge. Donnie on the bridge with Hal. Pete coming up from the engine room. Manny lashing the tarp. Reuben holding the spotlight. Me at the rail. We went to bed. In the morning we opened the net. There was nothing inside. The code end was empty. Not the catch fell out empty. Empty. The cinch line was tied. The mesh had a gap. It was a small gap, right at the seam where the cinch meets the body of the net. The cordage was unraveled, not torn. It had come apart, like fingers had worked at the knots from the inside until the seam gave. I stood looking at the gap for a long time before Hal called me over to help with the deck. I did the head count. 6. We started cleaning up. I was coiling the lazy line when I saw it. There was a handprint on the deck where the code end had been resting. 5 fingers, palm flat. The heel of the hand pressed into the planks, the size of a man's hand, already drying in the morning sun. The wood around the fingers was wrong. The grain was raised, splintered slightly, lifted away from the surface, not pressed down, pulled. The handprint hadn't been left by something resting its weight on the deck. It had been left by something dragging itself across the deck, fingers digging in for purchase, the wood resisting and giving way in small fibers. I scrubbed the print with a deck brush before anyone else came back to that side of the boat. I don't know why I did that. We kept fishing. The next day, the catch was thin. We dragged the same bottom and pulled up almost nothing. Hal said we had spooked the fish. He moved us 30 miles east. That night around 1 a.m., I came up from the bunk to use the head and Reuben was sitting at the galley table. Reuben does not work the late watch. Reuben should have been asleep. Reuben works the morning watch with me. We both came up at 4 a.m. He was sitting at the galley table with his back to me. He was not eating anything. He was not on his phone. The galley was dark except for the small light over the stove. I said his name. He turned around. It was Reuben. His face, his shape, but he was looking at me like he didn't know who I was, and his eyes weren't focusing on mine. They were focusing somewhere about 6 inches behind my head. I said, "What are you doing up?" His mouth moved. The shape of his mouth made the words, "I'm hungry." The sound came a half-second later. The voice was Reuben's voice, but it arrived after his lips had already finished the sentence and gone silent. as if the words had to travel from somewhere else to reach me. There was nothing in front of him. No food, no plate, no cup. I stood there for a few seconds. He turned back around and faced the dark wall again. I went to the head. When I came back through the galley, he was gone. The chair he had been sitting in was still pulled out from the table, not pushed back in. I put my hand on the seat. The wood was warm, body warm. I went down to the bunk room. Reuben was in his bunk, asleep, snoring the way he always snores. I checked. I shook his shoulder. He woke up enough to swear at me and then went back to sleep. I stood in the bunk room and counted. Hal in the captain's cabin, Donnie on his bunk, Pete in his bunk, Manny in his bunk, Reuben in his bunk, me, standing. 6. I went back up through the galley. The chair was still pulled out. I put my hand on it again. Still warm. I went to bed. I came up at 4 a.m. for my watch. I walked through the galley on the way to the deck. The chair was still pulled out. I put my hand on it. Still warm. Same temperature it had been at 1 a.m. Body warm. The chair had been warm for 3 hours and the wood was old and the galley was cold, and nothing should have stayed warm that long. Whatever had been sitting in that chair was warming it from inside the wood. I worked my watch. I came back through the galley around 6 a.m. The chair was still pulled out. The wood was cool now. Whatever had been sitting there was finished. The next day, Reuben did not remember being in the galley. I asked him. He said he had slept through the night. I asked Manny if he had heard me come up. Manny said he had not heard anything. I started counting more often. Every time I came up on deck, every time I went down to the bunk room, every time I passed someone on the corridor. The count stayed at 6. The count was always 6. I am writing that down because I want it on the record that the count was 6 right up until it wasn't. Day 6 of the trip. Hal called everyone to the wheelhouse for a quick meeting about the route home. We stood in a half circle around the chart table. I counted heads. 6. He talked for about 3 minutes. He told us the bottom east of here had been dead, and we were going to pack it in early and run back to port a day ahead of schedule. Then he told us to get back to work. We started filing out of the wheelhouse. The rest of the day I worked the deck. We were stowing gear, breaking down the trawl, washing salt off the winches. I counted 3 times that afternoon. Each time I came up at the same number. 5. I did not register that the number had changed. I want to be precise about this. I counted 5 and I wrote 5 in my head, and I did not feel the count was wrong. I just kept working. It was sometime around dinner that I realized I had been counting 5 for hours, and that an hour ago I had been counting 6, and that no one had left the boat. We were 150 miles from shore. No one could have left. I went to Hal and asked him who else was on the boat. Hal looked at me for a long moment. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "How many of us are there?" He said, 5. Always been 5. You feeling okay? I went back to my station. I did not finish the evening's work. I sat with my back against the rail and tried to remember the name of the 6th man. The name would not come. I have worked with him for 14 years. I should know his name the way I know my own. But when I tried to think of him, I could only think of his place at the rail, his hands on the cinch line, the way he laughed at one of Hal's jokes once, on a calm day, 4 trips ago. I could see the place where he should be. I could not see him. I went down to the bunk room. There were 5 bunks. I had never noticed there were only 5 bunks. I would have sworn there were 6. The space where the 6th bunk should have been was wall. The wall was old. The wood matched the rest of the bunk room. There was no seam, no hinge, no evidence anything had ever been there. I am writing this from my bunk. I have been here for about an hour. The crew is treating me normally. They keep asking if I'm feeling okay. They think I'm having a breakdown. I just got up and looked at myself in the small mirror over the sink in the head. It is my face. Every detail is right. The scar above my left eyebrow from the winch cable in 2019, the way my hair grows in 2 directions at the crown, the chip in my front tooth from a fight in 2014. I stood and watched the face for a long time, looking at what was wrong. The face was breathing slightly behind me. When I inhaled, the reflection inhaled a quarter second after. When I exhaled, the reflection exhaled a quarter second after. The chest rose flat. The chest fell flat. I held my breath. The reflection held its breath. I tried to catch it not breathing when I wasn't breathing. I couldn't. But the timing was wrong. I came back to my bunk. I sat down. I was looking at my hands. They were my hands. The scar across the right knuckle from the winch accident in 2019 was there. The ring of paler skin on the left finger from where I'd worn a wedding ring for the 4 years before the divorce. The small permanent stain of net tar on the right thumb that no soap had ever fully cleaned off. The hands looked right. I pinched the back of my left hand with my right hand, pinched hard, the way you would to wake yourself from a dream. I felt the pressure, but no pain. I pinched harder. I twisted the skin between my fingernails. I watched the skin redden and crease. Nothing. I bit the side of my hand. I bit hard enough that I should have broken the skin. The skin did not break. My teeth pressed into something that gave like meat, but did not bleed and did not hurt. The hands look right. But whatever they are made of is starting to forget what hands are made of. I took out my phone. I have a photo from before we left port. The crew standing in front of the boat at the dock. I keep it as my phone background. I opened the photo. There were 5 men in the photo. Hal, Donnie, Pete, Manny, Ruben. I counted them 3 times. 5. I have been looking at this photo for 8 days. I know this photo. I was at the dock that morning. I remember Hal making a joke about the weather. I remember Manny's mother dropping him off. I remember standing on the left side of the group, between the cooler and the bollard, with my hand on Ruben's shoulder. I am not in the photo. The cooler is there. The bollard is there. Ruben's shoulder is there. And there is no hand on it. I have been at the dock. I have been on this boat. I have been at this rail and this wheel and these winches for 14 years. I am being unmade. The thing we pulled up from 800 feet did not come onto the boat to live here. It came onto the boat to take my place. It worked the knots in the coat end from the inside until the seam gave. It dragged itself across the deck on its hands. It sat in my chair in the galley and warmed the wood from the inside. It wore Ruben's face for a few seconds at 1 a.m. to see how a face was worn. It is wearing my place now. Hal does not see me anymore. Hal sees 5 men, and one of them is in my spot, doing my job, with my hands on the lazy line. Hal is concerned about the man who keeps asking strange questions, but Hal does not know that man's name, and tomorrow Hal will not see him at all. I have been trying to remember my own name. I had a name an hour ago. I was using it in my head, like a word you wear. I just tried to write it down and the letters would not come. I tried to write the name of my mother. I tried to write the name of the town where I grew up. I tried to write the name of my first dog. The shapes are slipping. Hal, Donnie, Pete, Manny, Ruben. I know those names. I have known those names for 14 years. One of those names was my friend. One of those names called my name across the deck on the morning the photo was taken. I do not know which. The trip ends in 2 days. There will be 5 men walking off the boat in port. They will not be missing anyone, because by then, there will be no one to miss. If you are reading this and you remember me, please, tell me my name.
It all happened when we were 8 years old. It started when my friends told me about a strange thing they saw while exploring the woods behind the school. We call it the hands, Craig said. It's so freaky. You're gonna freak when you see it. It's so awesome, Miranda, Craig's sister, said. At recess, they led me into the woods. We walked on the dirt path for 5 minutes until we came to a large, distinctive tree stump. From there, we took a left, off the path, and continued into the forest. The way was marked sporadically by arrows carved on the trees. That's how Craig and Miranda had found it in the first place, following the arrows. After another 5 minutes, we came to a tall wooden fence, a square about 50 feet away. The old fence splintered and decayed. Remnants of white paint spelled DGRKPUT. We slipped through the gap left by a fallen picket. My eyes widened in disbelief at what I saw there. There were dozens of hands reaching out of the ground. One day we counted them and found there were exactly 37. They seemed to grow from the forest floor like toadstools. They sat at all different heights. One stood almost a foot in the air, a whole forearm exposed. One was just a few fingertips, barely peeking out from the dirt. The rest were in between. They were scattered, seemingly random, but they were mostly about 6 inches to a foot away from each other. There were all sorts of hands. Big hands, small hands, wrinkled hands, smooth hands. One had a shiny bracelet. Another had long pink nails with hot pink polish. Watch this, Craig said as he grabbed a stick off the ground and poked a large hairy hand in its palm. The hand snapped shut, grabbing the other end of the stick. Holy, I blurted out. Do they all do that? Yeah, Craig answered, grinning. But some are faster than the other ones, Miranda added. She pointed to a muscular hand attached to a thick wrist. That one can even catch stuff if you throw at it. But you can only touch them with a stick or something, Craig said. You can't touch it directly. What happens if you touch one? I asked. It gets you, Miranda said. Duh. We visited the hands many times after that. They were a fascinating curiosity. One time Craig was looking at a particular hand and he called me over. Whoa, Craig said. This one has a birthmark just like yours. I cringed. At that age, I was still pretty self-conscious about the very noticeable purple birthmark in the approximate shape of New Jersey on the back of my hand. The hand Craig pointed to was that of an old man, pale and wrinkled. When I leaned in to see his hand, I had to admit the similarity was striking. Maybe it's your twin, Craig said. How could it be my twin? It's like 100, I replied. I don't know. He shrugged. Another time we were watching the hands and a squirrel came along. This was unusual since animals usually avoided the hands. But this time one of them was holding a plump black walnut between its thumb and pointer finger. After much trepidation, the squirrel stood up, climbing into the hand to snatch the treat. The squirrel was quick, but the hand was quicker. It grabbed the squirrel and began squeezing. The hand's knuckles turned white as the squirrel thrashed in its grip. We watched silently in a mix of horror and morbid fascination as the hand fought what we now realized was its prey. After about a minute, the squirrel stopped its thrashing. It made a few more futile spasms, then twitched, then went limp. The next time we returned to the hands, the squirrel was gone. The last time we spent at the hands together, we were hanging out after spring break. Miranda told us that she had come up with a new idea for a game we could play. Over break, Miranda and Craig had gone to visit their grandma who lived up by the beach. On the way there, Craig was showing off the shark tooth necklace and the mood ring he'd bought at an aquarium gift shop over break. He explained what all the colors on the ring meant, and how his dad told him the ring was made by scientists at NASA. Miranda showed off the henna tattoos on her cheek and the back of her hand. Emily, their cousin, did it for me. She's a real tattoo artist and stuff, she bragged. Looks like butts, Craig chortled. They're hearts, Miranda said, stomping a foot on the ground. Miranda has butt tattoos, Craig said in a sing-songy voice. Whatever, Miranda said. The argument stopped as we arrived at the hands. So here's the game, Miranda said. You have to be super brave. With that, Miranda hopscotched between the hands. She took jump after jump, threading the needle between them until she got to the other side of the clearing, about 40 feet away from us. Come on, Miranda called over to us. It's easy. Me and Craig both hesitated. After a long, heavy pause, Craig spoke up. I don't know if that's a good idea, he said. 'Cause you're scared, Miranda teased. I can tell 'cause your ring's black. That means scared. I can see it from here. Nuh-uh, it's not black, it's blue, he said, raising his hand. See? Craig took a deep breath, puffed his chest, and jumped through the hands. Well, he did so less gracefully than Miranda. He made it through to stand next to her. Now you have to try, Craig said, pointing at me. I don't want to, I said. What if I accidentally touch one? Chicken, Miranda teased. She and Craig made squawking sounds at me while folding their arms like chicken wings. You're being dumb, I argued, my cheeks feeling hot. I took a hesitant step in between two of the hands. Then I took a hop deeper into the field. On my third hop, I almost lost my balance. For a split second, I was sure I was going to fall into the grip of the bed of hands. However, I quickly regained my balance. Scared, I hopped back out to safety. Lame, Craig teased. You barely got in at all. My heart was still pounding from almost falling. My cheeks started burning and I felt my eyes begin to well up. This is a dumb game, I yelled. I don't want to play anymore. With that, I stormed off. Craig and Miranda called after me, but I didn't listen. To this day, I wonder if things would have gone differently if I hadn't stormed off in my little temper tantrum. That night there was a ring at my door. It was Craig and Miranda's parents. They hadn't come home that night. My parents asked me where I last saw them. Craig, Miranda, and I had a sort of unspoken understanding that the hands were a secret. We hadn't told anyone else about them as they seemed the kind of things parents may not approve of. But now I was worried. We went out into the night, flashlights in hand, and I showed them to the area. They looked at the scene with awe and disbelief, scanning it with the flashlights. A few seconds of looking later, Miranda's mother screamed. After another second, their father started screaming too. Their flashlights were fixed on two hands jutting out from the ground, right next to each other. These hands hadn't been there before. They were the tallest there, as nearly their whole arms protruded from the ground. When I looked at them closely, my heart sank. They were small hands. A black mood ring on one, a heart-shaped henna tattoo on the other. I want to preface this by saying I am not a good person, though I try to be. I've had a troubling past, got mixed in with the wrong internet crowd, and a lot of toxic ideologies. I began stalking when I was 16, after my first girlfriend left me for another guy, and I, in my pain, found myself reading about similar experiences in forums I shouldn't have been in, and got the idea of getting back at her from some internet spaces. As I grew up, I began agreeing more and more with some ideas about women that made me a pathetic and insecure man. I became severely attached to my partners and wanted to have total control, always fearful they might be cheating on me or doing something else to try and hurt me. It didn't help that I was always rushing into relationships, always trying to avoid that sense of utter loneliness that came with being single. That came with partners who hurt me, partners I hurt, and some mutually assured destruction. My insecurity and distrust made me a somewhat skillful stalker, and I secretly spied on my partners however I could. I will not share the methods I used here, for that might invite others to try the same thing, which is not my objective. When I was 24, my stalking and hateful behavior almost got me in jail. I got a restraining order, was required to attend anger management classes and therapy. It was the first time I had to face consequences for my abhorrent actions. And well, I'll be the first one to admit that these consequences weren't as severe as some people might want for people like me. They ended up actually helping in setting me straight. My therapist was an older woman I'll call Miss Price. She helped me a lot in dealing with my issues, all the deep-seated hatred and insecurities I had. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be who I am today, 6 years later. She learned every bad thing I went through, every horrible thing I did, and showed me kindness and understanding I never thought I deserved. Over time, she became a sort of motherly figure to me, and although at 26 I had made so much progress that my visits became more sporadic, I still kept in contact with her via email and social media. 3 years ago, I met Emma, a gorgeous girl with a bubbly personality and a heart of gold, always wearing muted greens and reds and sweaters and scarves, silky brown hair reaching down her back, and a pair of round glasses that completed that cozy look that immediately made me feel attracted to her. Feeling like I could do better now that I had overcome a lot of my issues, I struck up a conversation with her. Since our first interaction, I felt static in the air. She was such a fun person to talk to. Everything she said got my immediate interest. Despite my sudden approach, she was nonetheless friendly, and after an impromptu first date, we found ourselves following each other on social media and exchanging phone numbers. The instant attraction was mutual. That much was clear. We made plans to go out again the very next week, and over time our dates became more frequent as we became more involved in each other's lives. Emma was a light fantasy writer, and had a blog in which she posted short stories on. She was fairly popular and even had a novel on the works. When I first got to read her works, I was immediately transported into the world she portrayed with pen and paper. Truly, my new friend had clear talent, and that aspect made me fall for her even more. Still, I made sure to take it slow. I wanted the both of us to get to know each other better before asking her to be my girlfriend. After 5 months, however, Emma was the one that confessed her love for me. I was so happy to hear that from her. But I knew I couldn't start a relationship with her without telling her about my past. So I did. I told her everything. The things I'd done, the things that were done to me. I tried to be as raw as possible, not to excuse my actions in any way, and to show I was trying to be a better man. And sweet, sweet Emma decided to give me a chance. She was truly an angel, and I promised to myself that I'd be the best boyfriend I could for her. Our relationship developed a lot quicker after that, and while I often found myself thinking of checking her phone for anything suspicious while she left it unattended, or trying to look through the list of people she followed in her accounts, I always stopped myself before I could act on it. I tried my best to trust her, and I was always honest about having those thoughts with her. Sometimes she'd show me the people she was talking to all on her own, trying to ease my worries when I was struggling the most. Emma cared deeply about me and wanted me to get better. Her openness was so refreshing, and it was something I had never experienced before. Her support meant the most to me, and over time, I found myself able to feel at ease while being with her. There were still times I felt a worry or need to do something stalkerish, but it became a lot easier to manage, as I had no real reason to doubt Emma in the slightest. In my happiest moments, I considered both Emma and Miss Price to be my saviors. Everything changed about 1.5 years into our relationship. Emma was an only child. and still very involved in her parents' lives despite living on her own and being only a year younger than me. I couldn't say the same about me. My parents hated me for becoming such an awful person, and they were unwilling to give me a second chance. I understood where they were coming from, but that didn't make it hurt any less. It was winter time, and Emma's parents invited us to a trip in the mountains. By that point, we had been acquainted for a while, and thanks to their kindness, no doubt where Emma got that from, I felt like I had a family again. Tragically, I was unable to go, as my work kept me especially busy on the days leading to Christmas Day. Sometimes I wish I had gone. Maybe things would have gone differently then. The day before New Year's Eve, a man called me on the phone claiming to be a man named Hank, one of Emma's uncles. He said I was listed as Emma's emergency contact, and told me the bad news. Emma and her parents had gotten into an accident. Apparently, a bear managed to get into their cabin and things got ugly. The bear killed both her parents, and while Emma herself ended mostly unharmed, save for a few minor injuries, the experience severely traumatized her. Damn unfortunate to come across a bear during winter time, he said solemnly. I couldn't put it any better, and that very same day I found myself rushing to the hospital Emma was in. The woman that laid on that hospital bed was almost unrecognizable. She had white bandages wrapped around her left arm and upper thigh. Some splotches of dried blood clearly shone in various spots. Truly, the injuries didn't seem that bad, but her expression, it was an expression I had never seen in her face. Neither anger nor sorrow. Rather, complete emptiness. A nurse told me she was still in an emotional shock, and that it might take weeks or even months for her to recover. As I tried talking to her, she replied to me in a dry, monotone voice. Her eyes looked dead, as if there was nothing left of the woman I loved. Later, I found she had incurred memory loss. Weeks passed, and I had her move in with me so I could take care of her. It was an uncomfortable time, but I genuinely wanted to take care of her and help her recover. She became clumsy, and she had forgotten even the most basic of things. I had to teach her things like how to eat properly and how to cook. She was relearning many things, including some she taught me herself in the past, and most of her friends and family were severely worried for her well-being. I sought the aid of specialists in the medical field, and was told it was most likely due to high stress or perhaps some head injury we didn't know about. After getting some studies done, we were told they could find no such injury. At least her ability to relearn these skills wasn't impeded in the slightest, and it seemed as if her mind was as sharp as ever. It was a tough time, and with memory loss, I was also forced to manage her social media and keep note of her passwords while she readjusted. This gave me a lot of unwanted power over all her messages and information, but I felt proud for being able to fight those urges with relative ease. 6 months later, things came back to a somewhat normal state. Emma learned things quickly, and seemed to become much more efficient at doing everything than before. That also came with a shift in personality, however. Her bubbly and kind demeanor changed to a more serious and uncaring attitude. It was as if she had become a completely different person, as if my Emma wasn't there anymore. At first, she wouldn't even hug me, and I didn't want to try any kind of intimacy, knowing she didn't remember her feelings for me. We didn't even sleep together. I just let her sleep in my bed while I slept on the couch. As she began getting better and questioned what our relationship was, I told her that she could decide that once she processed her feelings for me. As much as it hurt, I didn't want her to feel forced to be with me if she didn't feel love anymore. Soon after, she started demonstrating affection in weird ways. She would bite me, over time with greater intensity, and lick my arms or neck, all the while still unwilling to hug me often, or even kiss. After that, I would wake up in the middle of the night and find her standing next to me staring. Often I'd shriek in horror at the sudden sight of a dark figure in front of me. but as it became a common occurrence, I got used to it. Every time I asked her what she was doing, she told me she couldn't sleep that night, and that watching me sleep helped her sleep as well. I began growing increasingly worried, but as she never once hurt me while I slept, I tried to bear with it as best as I could. To make things simple, I had her use one of my emails so she could learn how to use my computer at the start, since her laptop got destroyed in the attack. After she had readjusted, it became a habit for her to keep using that email while using my PC, even though her phone had her normal email in it. She didn't seem to find any reason to switch emails, or even manage multiple accounts anymore. She was comfortable simply using what was on each device by default. A few months ago, while using my computer alone, I decided to check my browser history to look for a website I was visiting the day prior, and had forgotten the name of. Naturally, the searches there were a mix of mine and hers, so I didn't bat an eye when I saw random video searches I didn't look for, or the odd site here and there. That wasn't until a specific search caught my eye. Jobs that work with fresh corpses. This was quite off-putting, but I tried to rationalize that maybe she was writing again and needed some inspiration. After all, her memory loss also came with changes to her interests, and while she no longer was into writing, she developed a taste for horror that could be leading into, perhaps, writing stories of a different genre. The odd search got me curious, and I began to look further down the search history. I could find a lot of true crime, urban legends, and close encounters with monsters. I also noticed that, every few weeks, she would look for reports on the incident that took her parents' life, often looking at the original publications and the few updates made throughout the initial months. Although she didn't seem to remember it, she appeared to have gained some sort of morbid curiosity for the subject. As I scrolled back closer to Christmas, closer to the time I began teaching her how to use my computer, I found more crude search results, such as human rituals, how to show emotions, how to live with others, common roadkill sites, looked for specifically with the name of our town in the search, and is it socially acceptable to eat another human? I had a deeply unsettling feeling, but I couldn't come to any conclusions yet. From then on, I began observing Emma more closely, and at the same time she began getting more involved in doing housework. While she would refuse to cook, she'd always watch me prepare meals for the both of us. On one occasion I cut my finger while chopping some vegetables, and before I could react, Emma had it in her mouth sucking the blood out. She said she just wanted to help, but I decided to be more helpful after that odd display. When she looked at me, I noticed how her calm demeanor hid something behind it, something I didn't understand at that point, yet still made me feel uncomfortable. I decided to set up a hidden camera with night vision in my living room, pointed at the couch where I slept. I checked the footage recorded at night on a phone app that came with the camera, and noticed her nightly visits continued. Now, if not from the start, they were happening every single night. Over time, I installed more hidden cameras around the house, making sure they weren't many to reduce the chance of her finding them. After watching the footage, I noticed that she had a habit of always standing in front of the window, peeking through the blinds and looking at me as I drove off. Then, she'd walk to my computer or sit down, and simply look at videos or read things all day long. That blank, unchanging expression she used to have, coming back and only leaving once I was back or where she had to leave the house. Originally, she didn't leave the house much, but as she became more comfortable being alone, she gradually made a habit of getting groceries on her own while I was at work, messaging me to ask if I wanted anything. Knowing what I knew, this started to look suspicious as well, so one day, I decided to follow her to clear my doubts. That day I took the day off and lied to her, telling her I was heading to work. The day before I placed a tracker in her car I bought a few days earlier, and that morning I snuck out a change of clothes and a pair of binoculars in my suitcase. then drove my car to a parking lot near a car rental place to rent one for the day. After that, I switched clothes, checked the tracker on the app, and began following her around. I felt guilty about returning to my old ways and disappointing Miss Price, but I told myself this time wasn't out of jealousy or insecurity. Rather, it was due to fear for my safety. She did what any normal person would do, visit the mall and a few smaller stores. The thing that scared me the most was what I found she did after. I followed Emma back home, making sure to keep my distance, and parked the car a few streets away, far enough to be unnoticed and close enough to use my binoculars. After she parked and carried the groceries inside, I looked at my phone and accessed the cameras app to look at her in real time. She took everything out of the bags and put everything in its respective place, but left a block of raw meat. I think it was beef, out on the counter. Next, she got a mop and a bucket, took off all her clothes, threw them on a nearby couch, grabbed a chunk of meat, and began eating it. My jaw hit the bottom of the car as I looked at my now ex-girlfriend eating raw meat with nothing on. The fresh blood dripping down her mouth and into her chest and abdomen, in a way that reminded me of some sort of satanic ritual or the like. I felt sick to my stomach, unsure if this was some sort of mental illness or something else, and the somewhat low quality of the chewing noises and her grunts simply added to the bizarre experience. Then, as I recovered from the shock and tried to make sense of what I was seeing and hearing, I recalled her search history and her strange fascination with the attack that killed her parents. I believe in the paranormal, but had never experienced anything myself, and I was wondering if what attacked Emma and her parents that day wasn't a bear, but something else. If maybe, just maybe, my beloved girlfriend had fallen victim to the monster as well, and it had come back pretending to be her. Looking back at the video feed, she kept eating the entire chunk of meat, probably about 4 pounds. Though I couldn't really tell from the video alone, until it was completely gone. It was an insane amount of meat that no human should eat in a single day, let alone in a single meal. After that, she mopped down the floor, cleaned herself with a few napkins, brought them to the bathroom and flushed them down the toilet. Lastly, she went to take a shower. All the evidence of her feast, gone. Were it not for me having a recording of it, as far as I could tell, this was the first time she did something like that in the house. No other recordings showed her doing anything like that in the past. That night, I came back home still pretending to have worked. Fortunately, she didn't ask about it, and we spent the night peacefully. Just in case, I put the phone in my pajama pants, grabbed a kitchen knife, and slid it under my pillow before going to bed. I was twisting and turning, unable to sleep in the slightest. Suddenly, I heard the door of my room open, and I pretended to be asleep as Emma walked towards me and stood right in front of the couch. I half opened my eyes and saw the woman I used to love, her face perfectly illuminated by moonlight, mine obscured by penumbra. From that experience, I was able to understand the look in her eyes, that look that had sent shivers down my spine multiple times, even though I didn't know why. It was hunger, a ravenous, primal hunger. I was her prey. I couldn't move. My breathing started to get heavy, and I had to do my best to keep it under control. I pretended to be asleep while that thing kept looking at me. It felt like I was stuck in that uncomfortable space for hours. But whatever the actual time was, she left after a while. When I felt the danger had passed, I was finally able to sleep again, and did so almost immediately. I woke up again with a sudden jolt of pain and found Emma, or the thing masquerading as her, kneeling down and biting down on my left arm. I tried pulling away and she bit off a chunk of skin without mercy. "What is wrong with you?" I asked, the adrenaline quickly rushing through my body as I went on high alert and pushed her away, grabbing the knife with my right hand and pointing it at her while trying to step back. Her words came out so desperate, her voice almost guttural and uncanny. "I'm sorry. It's just your fear. It makes me even hungrier. I leapt back onto the couch and put my free hand in the back seat to try and flip around. But the weight I put all of a sudden made the couch fall backwards, and I stumbled sideways onto the floor behind, falling on my left side while the knife flew off my hand and landed nearby, in between me and the front door. I looked back and Emma was leaping at me like an animal, landing next to my left leg and biting into the calf. Even through the thick fabric of the pants I was wearing, I felt her teeth sinking into my skin like sharp needles, and while trying to kick at her with my other leg in an awkward way, I used my healthy hand to try and reach for the knife. Her mouth wouldn't leave my calf, and it wasn't until she managed to rip yet another chunk of my flesh that she finally let me go. A hole in my pants with blood soaking into the fabric was the only indication that it was my only chance to leave. As it was clear I couldn't fight this thing, I crawled pathetically towards the knife and picked it up, then leaned against the wall next to the front door to unlock it while the creature, now almost completely feral, struggled trying to spit out the cloth stuck in its teeth. The next part was a blur. I recall opening the door and crawling out before closing it behind me. I think the adrenaline coursing through my veins was working overtime, because next thing I knew, I was running out into the street in the middle of the night while the thing chased behind me. I don't know how long that went for, but I'm sure that, had I not closed the door while it was distracted, it would have caught up to me before I was saved. I didn't know how this happened, as I lost consciousness when help arrived. I woke up a few days later, finding myself with bandages not only on my calf and wrist, but also on my stomach. I was told by one of the doctors that the damage I had incurred required surgery, and that there were 2 officers waiting for me to wake up to take my statement. I told them what happened, and fortunately, my phone survived the ordeal with just a few cracks on the screen. I showed them some of what I had gathered, leaving out any of my paranormal theories, and told them she began acting crazier and crazier since the accident with her parents. After explaining everything, I found out what happened after I fell unconscious. A truck with some college guys coming back from a party stumbled across Emma in the middle of the road, digging her teeth into the side of my gut while I was unconscious. They said that the car's headlights startled her, and at that moment they noticed what she was doing. They figured she was some sort of junkie and tried to scare her away. Fortunately, they had weapons on them, so after a few warning shots, the thing scurried away into the nearby woods. The guys called the police and an ambulance for me, and that's how I ended up in the hospital. That was 2 months ago. Since then, government officials came to my home and confiscated my cameras and electronics. I didn't fight them on it, though I was upset I wouldn't be allowed to have any video evidence of what happened. I was told there would be no further issues, but that I should change the locks and get a weapon, just in case. The story that was given to the press was that Emma had suffered a mental breakdown and attacked me, but ran off before police could get to where the guys found me, and hadn't been found since. 9 people have gone missing in that time span. The first 5 were homeless, and sadly, that meant the police didn't put too much effort in the investigations. 2 weeks ago, a cargo worker, a nurse, and a teacher went missing as well. This caused a larger stir in the public, and I hoped it was just a coincidence, but something told me that it might be involved. Yesterday, I found that there was a new victim in the news. It was Miss Price, whom I returned to for therapy after I recovered enough from surgery. Now I find myself alone again, scared of something that might come and try to finish the job. I wonder if this is a punishment for all the wrongs I did in the past, if I got a taste of a perfect life just to be taken away by a force of nature, or perhaps something more malevolent. If someone you love gets in a terrible accident where they're the only survivors, and they seem to become a different person after that, be careful. They might not be your loved one anymore.
In the 14 years we'd worked at this sweatshop, Sylvia never missed a shift, so when she didn't show up one winter morning, a sour dread swept through my gut. I called her. The line didn't even ring. Something was wrong. I left without permission and began sprinting across the city, slipping across patches of ice concealed beneath the snowfall, frigid air biting at my lungs. She'd spoken oddly on the phone the night before, slurring her words, gushing about the beautiful truths we could discover about Mom within the mangrove forests of Ecuador. All I had to do was finally agree to take the trip with her. She claimed it would be a pilgrimage, a means of healing through communion with our mother's birth country. If we could connect with her, if we could comprehend the tiniest sliver of why she abandoned us, maybe we could forgive her. Maybe we could move on. It was ridiculous, borderline delusional. There was nothing for us in Ecuador. Besides, what could the mangroves teach us about Mom that we hadn't already learned the day she discarded us? Her only children on the streets of Chicago. I kept my mouth shut, though. Sylvia worked hard to salvage our lives. Putting my callous soul on display felt like spitting in her face. Instead, I rolled my eyes, assumed her drunk, and choked out my annual refrain. We'll go next year, I promise. I never had any intention of saying yes. I had plenty of chances to change my mind, but year after year, I coldly withstood her heartfelt pleas. I'd be lying if I said I didn't experience a similar longing, a yearning for answers that would sometimes keep me up at night, but I suppressed it, forced it down deep. Visiting her country was a symbol, an act of forgiveness. My mother did not deserve forgiveness. Screw her, and screw the putrid soil that supported her miserable feet. I would not go to that place. Not even for Sylvia. And yet, despite the belief that my stubbornness was completely justified, all I could think about as I raced through the snowfall was the cruel deceit of those 6 little words. We'll go next year. I promise. I arrived at Sylvia's a little after dawn. Dense overcasts stained her towering apartment complex in ashen gray. I slammed into the fire exit with the broken lock and began bolting up the stairs. Cockroaches skittered from my aching heels. Before long, I was in front of apartment 602, fumbling with my spare key, praying I was wrong, praying my bleak intuition was wildly off the mark. The door jerked open. Hazy light from the hallway trickled into her jet-black apartment. I felt my body go numb. She was on the floor, face down, sprawled out, transfixed and rigid. Her corpse harbored this strange brightness. Her skin seemed to glow in the darkness, shimmering a dull crimson like molten metal that had begun to cool. Carbon monoxide can do that, apparently. The coroner detailed the pathology to me with a tone-deaf excitement, shaking his wrinkled hands, talking himself breathless. Carbon monoxide is greedy, he said. The odorless gas hijacks your blood. That piracy alters the blood cells, displacing precious oxygen and brightening them in the process. That's why the corpse is flush. Suffocation makes them shine like a dying star. The whole thing tore me apart. I couldn't swallow the raw brutality of it. Sylvia died alone, completely without ceremony. A quick and meaningless end to a hard-fought life. When we were abandoned, Chicago was bursting at the seams with strays. The city wouldn't have saved us. If social services didn't have enough resources to rescue their own children, what chance did a pair of non-natives have? My sister refused to just lie down and die, though. She found a job. The man running the sweatshop wouldn't allow a 5-year-old to hang around the factory floor, so, while Sylvia toiled away in front of a sewing machine, I hid in the alleyway behind the factory, tucked myself snugly behind this massive battleship of a dumpster at the crack of dawn, and I wouldn't come out until I heard Sylvia knocking a code into the rusted metal. Usually well after the sun had set. The hiding spot required painful contortion, Some nights my leg spasms were so violent that she'd have to carry me to whatever underpass we were currently calling home. Before winter, though, Sylvia had earned enough money. We moved what little we had to a tiny apartment in the projects. Once I was old enough, she got me a job at the factory too. The sweatshop was a marginal improvement over the dumpster. The smell inside was slightly less foul, and my calves had a little more wiggle room, though I couldn't seem to escape the gaze of this lanky boy with pale blue eyes and a cleft upper lip. It took him a few months to work up the nerve to talk to me. We quickly became inseparable. A decade later, Ryan and I welcomed our daughter into the world. Elisa was about to turn 6 when Sylvia died. I don't want a party this year. She was sulking at the table, stirring a bowl of leathery slush that had once been Cheerios. I barely registered what she had said. I was standing at the sink, staring at the wall, pretending to wash dishes. The near scalding water felt good on my hands. "Why's that, sweetheart?" Ryan chirped. "Well, Auntie Sil isn't getting one, so..." Elisa stood, trudged across the kitchen, and dumped the disintegrated cereal into the basin. "It's not fair," she continued. "None of it seems fair. Life isn't fair." The caustic response spilled from my lips like a quiet exhale. Automatic, thoughtless. When I realized what I'd said, I shifted towards Elisa. She was studying me with wide, unblinking eyes. Her grimace betrayed a painful confusion. This was her first brush with death. Painful confusion had been her default setting for weeks. Her eyes became glassy. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but all that came out was hot air. Ryan scooped her into his arms and forced a smile. "Mommy's not mad, okay? She's just really tired. Want to go watch some TV?" She pressed her face into his chest and nodded. As he paced out of the kitchen, Ryan shot me a look. That look. Mommy may not have been mad, but Daddy sure was. There was a distant click. The muffled pandemonium of Saturday morning cartoons started echoing through our small home. I sighed and turned off the faucet. Much as I'd been enjoying the hurt, the scalding water had reddened my hands. The sight of flushed skin made me want to vomit. Ryan marched back into the kitchen, broad feet slapping across the hard wood. I stuck my hands into my pockets, closed my eyes, and braced myself. "The hell was that?" he hissed. I shrugged. "What, you disagree? You think what happened to Sil is fair?" "My God, that is not the point." My blood ignited. I spun around to face him. "Oh, I'm sorry. I had no idea there was a point. Please, Ryan, enlighten me." He glanced towards the living room. "Keep your voice down." I stomped up to him and spat out a single word. "Why?" I glared at him. There was another distant click, followed by a high-pitched muted sob. I heard Elisa too, but I would not yield. I wanted him to fight back. My jaw tightened but abruptly went slack. He looked away from me, a reaction more damaging than any insult. "Jesus, where are you right now, Carmen?" I cocked my head, but he didn't elaborate. He walked off to attend to Lisa, leaving me in the kitchen to puzzle over what the hell he meant. In retrospect, I think I understand. He was asking me to get a grip, begging me to divest my selfish wrath and realize what's important. The question's effect on me, however, was much more literal than Ryan intended. Where was I? Chicago. But was that where I should be? I couldn't get the question out of my head. It kept repeating, incessant and deafening. Then it hit me. I figured out where I should be. I took a clandestine trip to a nearby pawn shop. My engagement ring wasn't worth much. The stone was only half a carat after all. But it was enough. 800 would cover the plane tickets, and a few nights in a hostel. I know how it sounds, but I had a plan. Sylvia wasn't the only one who died from the gas leak, so there were talks of a class action lawsuit against the landlord, as if anything in this world can be considered a guarantee. I convinced myself that those earnings would surely buy the ring back. Someday. I started to leave around midnight. Our home was silent, save for my husband's wispy snores and the soft hum of the TV. I slung my backpack over my shoulders and tiptoed into the living room. They had fallen asleep together on the sofa. I stared at Ryan for a while, watching the TV bejewel his closed eyelids with its opaline flicker. He was going to be furious, but I would never come to terms with her death until I did this. It was my way of making amends. I stuck the post-it note onto his cell phone before slipping out into the cold, moonless night. Flying to Ecuador, back in 2 days. We'll text to let you know I'm safe. Then on the adhesive side, a last-minute addition. Tell Elisa I love her. I landed in Quito at noon. Exiting onto the tarmac, I was struck by an intense disorientation. The flight crew warned us that we might experience altitude sickness. Quito is nearly 10,000 feet above sea level, but I had no idea how immediate and debilitating it would be. The sun was blinding. My head pounded. Every breath was a struggle. Compared to Chicago's thin ozone, the thick tropical air felt like inhaling jelly. Hesitation festered in those breathless moments, but I squashed it. I couldn't turn back. I needed to see this through. I collapsed onto a bench outside the airport, took as deep a breath as I could manage, and switched my phone off airplane mode. A flurry of texts and missed calls flooded the screen. Notification after notification. The device was practically convulsing. I sent, "Landed, I'm okay," to Ryan without letting my eyes linger on the 20 unread texts above it. Then I called for a cab. Once they arrived, I returned the device to airplane mode. Quito is at the center of Ecuador, but my destination was closer to the coastline. That's where the mangroves bloom. Whenever she tried to sell me on this pilgrimage, Sylvia always harped on the mangroves. I never asked why, though I suspect she was channeling some fragment of Mom, some piece of her that I had forgotten. Sylvia was 12 when we were abandoned. I was 5. She actually had some memories of the woman. Maybe Mom harped on them too. Maybe the mangroves made her nostalgic for home. All things considered, a nature reserve seemed as good a spot as any for a healing communion with the land. It wasn't hard to narrow down which I'd visit. A few miles north of Pedernales, there was a small park that just seemed right. I don't know much about it, but for whatever reason, I couldn't see myself going anywhere else. Luckily, it was beautiful. I was reluctant to acknowledge the beauty at first, but as I stood on the shoreline, basking in the grandeur of what was effectively a tropical swamp, I felt my reluctance melt away. Mangrove roots rose in tangled clusters from the salt water, ornate yet chaotic, spiraling closer and closer together until they unified as a single trunk. Their canopy was fiercely animated. Small monkeys with slender arms and potbellies swung through the brush in chains. Exotic birds zipped between the branches, vibrant blurs of color swirling together to manifest a shifting kaleidoscope made with golds and violets and deep, deep reds. I dipped my toes in the water and stared at the forest, and I felt full, buoyant, happy even. Then, with a single thought, I crumbled. Sylvia should have been here too. I'd been so mean. I stewed on the shore for a long while, marinating in an acidic mixture of self-loathing and melancholy, until something odd caught my attention. A man lurking in my peripheral vision. His head was peeking out of the river, wet eyes leering at me through thick strands of soggy gray hair. My eyes snapped forward. There was a stone bobbing on the surface of the river, but no spying man. I whispered the word idiot as I turned to leave the reserve. It was an hour-and-a-half walk to the nearest hostel. I had enough money to afford another cab, but I didn't call one. I didn't deserve the luxury. I lurched along the roadside, head low, bare shoulders baking in the afternoon sun, becoming more despondent with each miserable step. The lush, rolling countryside was exceptionally quiet, a far cry from the ceaseless bluster of Chicago. Under different circumstances, I would have welcomed the tranquility. In the moment, though, the empty air only made the voice in my head seem louder. Why was I here? What did I expect to gain? Insight, absolution, levity? Stupid. It was all so stupid, so short-sighted, so pointless. All of a sudden, my ears perked. There was a soft, steady crunching a few yards back, the sound of dry grass being crushed under a boot heel. Was someone following me? I paused. The crunching stopped. I balled my hand into a fist, took a deep breath, and whipped my head around. But there was no one. Just the winding road and the sleepy hills. My heart rate slowed. When I started walking, the crunching resumed. I peered over my shoulder. Still, nothing behind me. I did my best to ignore the unsettling phenomena, but by the time I arrived at the hostel, the sun was setting, my calves were screaming, and my mind was ragged. In other words, I was ready for a drink. My memories of that night are disturbingly incomplete. Here's what I do remember. It begins with me at the back of this dimly lit dive bar. I'm brooding, throwing back liquor at a reckless pace, when I'm suddenly approached by a well-dressed man. He's sporting an indigo blazer and black chinos, overdressed for the stifling heat. Up close, he smells like brine. The table wobbles when he leans on it, one leg shorter than the others. He steadies my glass with 2 fingers so it doesn't fall. A small wave of brandy laps his gaunt fingertips. He takes his hand out of my glass and sits down. I can't remember whether he introduced himself or just sat down and started talking. Called himself Michael. Mikhail? Something like that. Over and over. He apologizes. I ask him, "What for?" He claims I already know, but I make him spell it out. "For Sylvia," he says. For the way she asphyxiated on perfectly good air. For the way the gas toyed with her mind. For the terror of her last moments, hallucinating alone in a lightless apartment. For everything, really. Wait, did I tell you all this? I ask. He says I probably did. Then he keeps talking. I'm not sure what about. I'm distracted by the whites of his eyes. There's movement. Pinpoints appear, enlarge, and then dissolve. Sort of like film grain. The rhythm is hypnotic. I'm comfortably spellbound until he says something that catches my attention. "Would you like to commune with your sister?" Slowly, with apprehension, I nod. From there, my recollection really fragments. There are breaks, skips in time, pieces I've lost. I follow him out of the bar, stumbling. I slip on the edge of the door frame, plunge forward and close my eyes, preparing myself for the impact. But there's nothing. No collision, no shattering bones, just a clean emptiness, a starving void. When I open my eyes, we're in a van. Michael's driving. I don't see anyone else, but there's laughter. So much laughter. Thousands of shrill, squeaking cackles come from the driver's seat, in excruciating cacophony, enraged wasps probing my eardrums. "Welcome home, little leech. Don't be afraid. Your baptism is overdue, but it'll be over before you know it," he says. We're accelerating. I can tell by how the darkened countryside is passing by, faster and faster. I plead for him to stop the car, but I can't even hear the words leaving my mouth. And Michael's not even watching the road anymore. He's twisted over the seat, leering at me, pinpoints dancing across the whites of his eyes, and then quiet. In an instant, the laughter's gone. Salty air scrapes my tongue. A bird trills far overhead. I look around. I'm sitting at the front of a small rowboat, floating down a narrow river, hemmed in by gnarled webs of mangrove roots. Moonlight drapes a faint silver membrane over the otherwise shadow-swelled landscape. Behind me, I hear something rowing. I know it's Michael, but I don't dare turn around and check. "Do you see her?" he whispers. I squint, carefully reaching for the root beds. My heart is stammering. My thoughts are frantic. How did I get here? What the hell is going on? "Do you see your sister, Carmen?" he moans. The blackness is nearly impenetrable, but I look closer, because I desperately want her to be there, because I need to tell Sylvia that I love her, and that I'm sorry. I knew something was wrong the night she died, but I didn't act. I could hear it in her voice when she spoke on the phone, but I chose to ignore it. Because the way she talked about Mom made me so angry. I could have saved her like she saved me, but I didn't. My eyes widen. I think I see something downstream. I convince myself something's there. A nebulous shape looming within the palisade of mangroves. My body's drifting forward, over the lip of the boat. I murmur my sister's name. "Sylvia?" I wait. A hand streaked with crimson skin erupts from the brackish river. Bloated fingers wrap around my wrist and pull. I don't have time to scream. I lose my balance and topple over the side of the boat, dragged under by the flushed red hand. Water surges into my chest when I attempt to breathe. Mud seeps into my stomach, causing it to spasm. I thrash, but it does nothing to slow my descent. My fingers ache for something to anchor onto. I can't determine if my eyes are open or closed. The darkness is all-consuming. I feel myself slipping away. Suddenly, something cold and sturdy grazes my palm. I use my remaining energy to squeeze it. The surface is smooth like metal. It's round, and it fits nicely in my palm. Reflexively, I turn my wrist. There's a creak. My foot drifts forward and somehow finds solid ground. I'm stepping into my home. The door slams shut behind me. Ryan is racing down the hallway. I double over, coughing, hacking like there's something stuck in my lungs, and my vision is dappled with tiny, pulsing dots. "You don't remember anything about how you got home?" The park bench squeaked as Ryan slid closer. He was sweating. His eyes darted between me and Elisa, who was pedaling her bicycle along a nearby path. I massaged his stone shoulders. No, I really don't. I was at the bar top drinking. Some guy came up and bothered me, said some strange stuff, but he was harmless. Then 24 hours later, I'm home. I pause, preparing another lie. But in between, nothing? Nothing at all? "Elisa, what did I say? Stay where I can see you." Startled, Elisa wobbled, then tumbled off her bike, landing knees first onto the pavement. "Come here, love," I called out. Elisa pulled herself together, stood, and then began plodding over to us, dragging her bike by the handlebars. Fresh blood glistened across her kneecaps. I stopped the massage and started rifling through my purse. Never went anywhere without a few band-aids and Neosporin, since we took her off training wheels. She slumped on the grass next to me, bleary-eyed. "Can I try to fix it?" Her lips cracked into a delicate smile. I bent over and began smearing the antiseptic on her abraded skin. "And the guy you mentioned, the one in the suit, you don't think he, took advantage of the situation?" "What?" I asked, lifting my head and throwing it over my shoulder. Ryan's pale blue eyes were wide and damp. Took me a second to realize what he was dancing around. For whatever reason, that was the farthest thing from my mind. "Oh, no, I don't think that freak did anything like that." Relief flooded over him. His shoulders seemed the slightest bit looser as he blotted a few tears with his shirt collar. "Thank God." That said, maybe he spiked my drink. Not with roofies, with, I don't know, a hallucinogen, something that could explain the amnesia. Can't say why anyone would dose a complete stranger, but my voice trailed off. Out of nowhere, every cell in my body began to buzz, and my attention was drawn to a man limping past us. His name was Mateo. He was well known in the neighborhood as a sweet but self-destructive man. Uncontrolled diabetes had ravaged his body. He couldn't see well, couldn't feel much below the waist, and worst of all, there was his foot, or what was left of it. From the shin down, the appendage was gangrenous, black like a cannonball and as cold as sleet, with a stench that could likely be appreciated from the upper atmosphere. When the tissue first went tits up, Mateo refused to get it amputated. We all assumed his days were numbered, and yet, years later, here he was, seesawing his way around, panhandling like usual. The necrotic tissue just never got infected, even though it absolutely should have. A perverse and sadistic miracle. Today, though, something was different. The flesh was moving, churning, the blackened skin peeking out from his dirt-caked sneaker, snapped and bubbled like boiling tar, surreal and revolting. I looked to his face. He wasn't in pain, he wasn't in distress. He wore the hollow smile and the vacant eyes of a lifelong scavenger, same as he always did. Nausea clawed at the back of my throat. I told myself it wasn't real. I tried to tear my eyes away, but God, I couldn't. There was something bewitching about the way his flesh churned. A pattern, meaning concealed within its beats and cadences. Something that needed to be felt, to be completely understood. A tactile language like Braille. The tips of my fingers began throbbing. Bizarre notions took root in my mind. The way his flesh moved, something about it reminded me of Sylvia's voice. No, I thought, that's absurd. But was it absurd? Speech is just a series of vibrations, right? Vibrations that could just as easily swim through dead meat as they could living vocal cords. No, I needed to get a grip. There was another explanation. I was exhausted. I was still under the effect of some hallucinogen. I was sick. No matter what I threw at it, though, the notion persisted. Some part of her was in that dead flesh. It was a paradox. The notion made no sense, and yet I'd never felt so sure of something. And all I had to do to know for certain was feel it move. I needed to touch Mateo's whispering foot. Needed to burrow my fingertips into the rot until I heard what she was saying. Mommy. Elisa's screech brought me back to reality. My lungs ached. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. Sorry, love. Here it is. I ripped the paper tabs from the band-aid and stuck it onto her knee. Only half paying attention, keeping Mateo fixed in my peripheral vision until he was well and truly out of sight. It was agonizing to let him go, like allowing free heroin to slip from your grasp when you're in seething withdrawal. I turned to Ryan. He was looking in Mateo's direction too, but his expression was flat, unbothered. He couldn't see what I could. As we left the park, Ryan made me promise to see a physician this week to address the amnesia, and a therapist within the month to address everything else. His conditions for forgiving my impulsive excursion abroad. I promised I would. That said, my mind was elsewhere. Michael, whoever he was, claimed he was granting me the ability to commune with Sylvia. Was this it? Did communion require some sort of medium, flesh as the interface between the living and the dead? Had I missed my opportunity? I could only answer the last of those three questions. I hadn't missed my opportunity, because I knew which alleyway Mateo slept in at night. The next morning, I returned to the factory for the first time since Sylvia's death. It was a strange and lonely homecoming. Not only was Sylvia gone, but Ryan was absent as well. The flu had been doing the rounds at Elisa's school. It was only a matter of time until she contracted it. He implored me to call out and take care of her, but I told him that was a bad idea. Although our workplace was much less exploitative than it had been when we were initially signed on, it was still run by a merciless organization whose patience could only be tested so much. Since he had continued to work while I was out on the few days of bereavement, my manager would afford me. It was important that I show my face. It was nicer than I anticipated. There was a blissful normality to the labor, the droning hum of the many sewing machines, the repetitive movements, the familiarity and the routine. The comfort, however, was fleeting. Before long, my fingertips began to throb. I thought of Mateo's whispering foot. Then my manager approached. Grace was a large woman with patchy gray hair and close-set eyes that seemed equally devoid of color. She stood over my station, tapping her foot as if she were waiting for me to do something, though I couldn't say what. Without warning, she started berating me. In essence, she was accusing Ryan and me of some sort of conspiracy, an attempt to defraud them. Why had there been only one of us present at any given time? What exactly were we trying to pull? Something to that effect. I don't remember precisely what she said. I couldn't focus on her paranoid rant. I was too distracted by her tongue. The flesh was whispering to me. Sylvia's voice. It was in there. I could tell by the way the wet muscle vibrated. I'd do anything to speak to my sister again, right? Yes. I would. I leaped from my chair, hand outstretched, reaching for her mouth. The suddenness of my outburst caught Grace off guard. She yelled, "Get back!" Before my fingers interrupted her, I cradled her tongue in my palm and pressed my fingertips into the warm, wiggling flesh. A panicked scream reverberated through the small bones in my wrist. I could feel Sylvia. I could almost hear her, too. She was trying to tell me something. But her voice was muffled, coarse with static like a call with a shoddy connection. As Grace's teeth began to clamp down, I dragged my fingertips across her tongue, arranging them into various configurations, trying to locate the pattern that would amplify this divine signal. Pain exploded across the back of my hand. I launched my arm back and ripped my hand from her mouth. Strips of skin peeled away under the pressure of her front tooth. The force caused Grace to fall backwards onto the floor. I stared at the traumatized woman. Blood trickled from her trembling lips. Her eyes were bulging, ripe with shock and fear. People were gathering around us. No one was exactly sure what happened. I shoved my injured hand into my pants pocket and pushed through the crowd. You'd think I'd have left the factory horrified and ashamed, but I walked home with a smile pinned to my jaw. I felt incredible. Waves of euphoria rushed through my body and collected in my fingertips. I was close. I was so very close. The police didn't come knocking that night. I was thankful, but not entirely surprised. Maybe I mangled Grace's tongue and she couldn't speak. Maybe she didn't want the law snooping around the factory. The reason didn't matter. All that mattered was what I planned on doing next. Ryan was exhausted and turned in early. Elisa had been a handful, apparently. Again, I was thankful, and I didn't bother asking questions. I felt like the world was paving the way, removing every barrier, keeping on a certain course, a path that could easily be confused for fate. Once I was sure my family was asleep, I left to find Mateo. The city was eerily quiet. I jogged from block to block without the urban white noise I was accustomed to, the blaring sirens and the distant music, and the drunken chatter of passerbys. The night was silent and black, like the river in the mangrove forest I may have drowned in. It was unnerving, but not enough to send me home, not even enough to slow me down. The euphoria I'd experienced earlier had completely disappeared. The throbbing in my fingertips resurfaced worse than ever. The pain was severe enough that I needed to cover my mouth with my uninjured hand, and muffle a wail. I was approaching Mateo's alley, and I didn't want the noise to scare him off. My wail gradually died down, and the pain briefly subsided, but as I pulled my palm away, I caught a glimpse of fingertips in the murky glow of a street lamp. They were swollen. Pockets of clear fluid stretched the skin to its absolute limit in some places, surpassing it in others, creating paper-cut-sized slits that leaked blood-tinged fluid. What the hell was happening to me? Better yet, where was my head? I was skulking through the city in the dead of night, presumably unemployed, with a sick kid at home to, what, commune with Sylvia through the flesh of some poor man? Yes, a voice in my mind said. That's exactly what I was going to do. That voice grew louder, and the impulse grew stronger, and eventually my legs began moving again. I wasn't jogging anymore. I was sprinting. Angry drivers blasted their horns as I raced across busy streets. I could have been hit, but I didn't care. I was focused. I was close. Mateo lived behind a local coffee shop. My heart sang when I saw their sign at the end of the block. I slowed my pace, steadied my breathing, and crept into the alleyway. A figure lay motionless atop a heated vent. Steam rose from beneath them, caressing their outline, giving them a shape in the inky darkness. His foot is necrotic, I reminded myself. Dead tissue means dead nerves. I might frighten him, but he won't feel any pain. I knelt down beside him, mesmerized by the vibrations radiating across his naked chin. I plunged my swollen fingertips into his flesh. There was resistance, much more than I anticipated. Then warmth licking my fingertips and a high-pitched guttural scream. Not the scream of an old man. The figure scrambled away from me. I caught a glimpse of their face in the moonlight. It was a young man with long hair and a deep scar transecting one of their eyebrows. They bolted from me, and I didn't give chase. The mistake was sobering. I terrorized and maimed a stranger for nothing. Absolutely nothing. My stomach heaved. I stumbled to my feet and fled from the alleyway. Salty tears stung my eyes. My mind seemed irreparably fractured. As I bolted home, it kept flipping back and forth between two opposing conclusions. I was broken, lost, and completely insane. No, that's not it. I was given a gift, baptized in secret waters. I could commune with Sylvia. I could tell her I loved her, tell her I was sorry, and I was close. I just needed to keep trying. When I slinked through the front door, nothing had changed. No winner had been decided. It felt like I was being torn apart from the inside out. I staggered through our home, gripping my head with both hands like my skull would fall apart if I didn't hold it together. I pushed open our bedroom door and stepped through. Ryan was snoring, sound asleep. He'd help me. I'd wake him up, show him my fingers, tell him about Michael, beg for his forgiveness, and... I stopped at the side of our bed and stood still. His entire body appeared to be vibrating. Every inch of visible skin was churning, silently swaying, undulating with Sylvia's voice, especially his eyelids, which rippled like the tide before a storm, graceful and treacherous. I reached both hands out. I hovered a thumb over each eyelid. She's in there. Sylvia's in his flesh, too. My mind demanded my muscles press down, not hard enough to kill him, just enough to sunder his naked flesh, to rip him open and baptize his viscera. Do it, a voice inside me screamed. My thumbs shook. I was about to give in. I could practically feel the green-lit impulse flying down my nervous system, but before it arrived at my thumbs, my eyes landed on my empty ring finger. The memory of pawning my engagement ring flashed through my mind. Disbelief surged through my body. Why would I do something so cruel? That's not who I am. That's not how Sylvia raised me to be. My muscles relaxed. I moved my hands away. My mind felt clear for the first time in weeks, and I came to a realization. There's something dangerous living inside me, and it came from Ecuador. Night gradually turned to dawn. I remained in control, sipping stale coffee at the kitchen table, determining what to do next. The emergency room seemed like a safe choice, but some part of me resisted. They won't understand. They'll think I'm insane. They'll lock me away. Of course, the question became, is that really what I think? Or is that a suggestion from the thing inside me, a way to prevent me from getting help? A shrill noise erupted from my cell phone. I nearly jumped out of my skin, dropping my mug in the process. It shattered on the kitchen tile, launching ceramic shrapnel in every direction. I whispered, pulling the device from my pocket. Based on the sound, I assumed it was an Amber Alert. It wasn't. The notification read, Emergency Alert System. Contagious disease warning for your area until further notice. Remain indoors. Click here or turn to Channel 8 for details. A sour dread swept through my gut. I raced into the living room, turned on the television, and flipped to Channel 8. There was a series of photographs on screen, squeezed between the news anchor and a banner that read, Outbreak of Unknown Contagion. Victims assaulted others before disease proved fatal. To my profound horror, I saw a man with a scar across his eyebrow, and a large woman with gray hair and close-set eyes. There were 4 other pictures, but I didn't recognize any of them. I scrambled to unmute the television. Originally thought to be under the influence due to their erratic behavior, health officials are now reporting that the perpetrators were likely suffering from some novel, rabies-like infection, though they refused to provide additional details for the time being. I felt something tugging at my shirt sleeve. I spun around, heart pounding, relieved to just see a groggy Elisa rubbing the sleep from her eyes. When did we leave the park, Mommy? I asked her to repeat herself, but the question didn't change. I said, when did we leave the park? We were there. We're here now. It doesn't make much sense. I don't remember the in-betweens. My heart fell through the floor. She didn't recall the previous 24 hours. She had amnesia. My eyes slowly drifted to the Band-Aid on her knee. I reached out a damp, trembling hand and peeled it off. There was a small crescent-shaped trench over her kneecap. I carefully hovered my swollen finger above it. A perfect fit. I'm starting to believe my mom abandoned Sylvia and me for a very specific reason. I think she was creating distance, keeping us away from Ecuador and from herself, because I'm infected with something from my mother's country, something that wants to spread, something that infiltrates your mind, something that would have said anything to convince me to plunge my diseased fingers into other people's flesh. Worst of all, I've given it to my daughter too. Compared to my manager and the man in the alley, we seem to react differently to whatever this infection is. For whatever reason, it doesn't kill us. I suspect the truth is hidden in our bloodline. God, Elisa's a smart kid. Empathetic too. She picked up on my distress almost immediately. Even if she didn't understand it, she hugged my leg, peered up at me with her pale blue eyes, and asked, So, what now? I swallowed my despair and forced a smile. I don't know, love. The pain in my fingertips was worsening. I was terrified for Elisa. The pain was coming for her, too. All I know is, whatever we do, we'll do it together. I picked her up and started walking towards the door. And I won't leave your side again, okay? Promise? My smile grew. For the first time since Sylvia's death, it was real. Yes, Elisa. I promise. I haven't left my house in a few years. I have lost count of how many exactly, to be honest. After the first few months, it kind of stopped bothering me as well. I didn't really feel the need to be outside. What is it good for? Here I'm well fed, comfortable, entertained, and safe. A combination of things I would never have if I stepped out. I have felt kind of strange lately, however. I can feel some kind of weirdness when I'm close to anything leading out, like windows or doors. It's hard to describe. You know that feeling when you know you are being watched so intently that it's as if your clothes didn't exist and your thoughts were written on your forehead? It's like that in a sense, but increasing the closer I am to even be looking out. At first I attributed it to my anxiousness, stepping up after not even seeing the sun for so long. Maybe my mental was just messed up. Problem is, I don't think I even see sunlight coming from the windows anymore. The tape, of course, doesn't help, but you would imagine at least some light coming from between it or piercing it, right? Then comes the thing that maybe sounds weird to you all, but that at the time made no difference for me. The topic of food. How do I get groceries? That type of stuff. Well, I don't know. I remember vividly I ordered most of my food at the beginning, as well as me having the money to always afford it, somehow. At some point my orders stopped going through, but food kept showing up inside the house. You would think this is a real red flag, right? Well, this didn't bother me too much. In fact, I was excited. Who wouldn't be happy to get free food? That thought process was so liberating, right until the feeling I mentioned started. The food started showing up less often, and when it does, even touching it feels dirty. The consistency is fine, but there's this prickling in the back of my head, as if I was going through radioactive waste. I started to notice how different I look when the pain from hunger started. I can feel my bare bones in every touch. My sunken cheeks are so sunken I probably look like a blinking corpse, as I barely have energy to do anything else most of the time. It has been 3 days since the last time I received any food, and hunger slapped me out of the stupor. I've tried to look up multiple times if there is something going on in my city or the world, but there are no related news, as if everything is normal outside. But how does this make any sense? I feel the dread from every opening in my house increasing every single day, and may even be hallucinating from hunger, as I can see shadows and curious-looking figures from the corners of my eyes, every single time I turn my head. So, I decided to remove the tape, and finally look outside of my windows. There is no window behind the tape. It is a wall. They are all walls behind the tape. I don't think there is any point in discussing this. I don't think I have the time to figure out any other solutions before hunger makes me unable to even act on any plan. I know the door is not a wall, as I have already felt its texture many times since this situation began. So, I will open the door today. I decided to write this in case hunger takes me, or if the outside takes that first. If I survive, I will get back to you all. Farewell.